I was just an average student, trying to make it through high school without drawing too much attention. Life at home wasn't perfect, and school often felt like an escape. I was the quiet one, keeping to myself and just trying to get by. But then, everything changed when I met Mr. Matthews, my new English teacher. On the surface, he seemed like a typical educator, friendly, approachable, and genuinely interested in helping his students succeed. He had a way of making even the dullest lesson feel relevant, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself engaged in class. Mr. Matthews wasn't just a teacher. He became someone I could talk to. At home, my parents were always busy, distracted with their own issues. There was little emotional connection, and I often felt overlooked. But when I was in his class, it was different. He listened. He asked questions, made eye contact, and treated me as if my thoughts mattered. It was like he cared about more than just my academic performance. It felt nice to be noticed, especially when I had been feeling invisible for so long. As the weeks passed, I started looking forward to his lessons more than any other class. I would find myself staying after school to ask him questions, not just about the material, but about life. He would stay behind, patiently offering advice about anything I wanted to discuss: family problems, how to deal with bullies, how to navigate teenage life. There was something comforting about his voice, the way he spoke with such calmness, as if everything would be okay if I just listened to him. In a way, he became my confidant, someone I could turn to when things got tough. But I didn't realize at the time that this attention wasn't entirely innocent. Slowly, I began to depend on him more. What started as casual conversations turned into more personal exchanges, and before long, I found myself sharing things I'd never shared with anyone else. He'd ask about my family, my friends, and always seemed so genuinely concerned. In my mind, he wasn't just my teacher anymore. He was someone who understood me in ways no one else did. As time passed, the line between student and teacher began to blur. I didn't notice it happening, but I started looking forward to the little moments I had with him. A brief smile in the hallway, a comment on my essay, or the way he would praise me for small achievements. Each encounter, no matter how brief, felt like it meant something. It was like I was special, like I mattered to him in a way that no one else seemed to. It felt good to be acknowledged in this way, but I didn't know it at the time, that these moments were the beginning of something dangerous. It wasn't until one day when I caught him looking at me a little too long during class that I began to feel uncomfortable. It was a brief moment, but it lingered in my mind for the rest of the day. I brushed it off, convincing myself that it was just my imagination. After all, he was my teacher, someone I trusted. Why would I think he saw me as anything other than a student? But deep down, something shifted. I became more aware of his presence, more conscious of his words and actions. Yet, I couldn't help myself. I found myself looking for those moments, those small signs that maybe, just maybe, he felt something more than just professional admiration. But in the beginning, it was easy to dismiss the red flags. I wasn't ready to see the truth. I wanted to believe that he was just being kind, just doing his job as a teacher. After all, what teacher didn't care about their students? What teacher didn't want to help them succeed, both academically and personally? I told myself that everything was normal, that I was just being overly sensitive. However, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't the kind of relationship I should be having with an educator. But by then, I had already become emotionally invested, and it was hard to let go of the connection that had been slowly building between us. I didn't know it yet, but the foundation for something much more complicated had been laid. The trust one had in Mr. Matthews was starting to evolve into something deeper, something that blurred the lines between respect and something more personal. What started as a student seeking guidance from a teacher was becoming an emotional dependency that would soon lead to a place I could never have imagined. As time went on, the conversations between Mr. Matthews and me grew more personal. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, but one day I realized that we weren't just talking about school anymore. He began to ask about my life outside of class, my family, my friends, my struggles. I felt a rush of warmth each time he showed genuine interest. He wasn't just my teacher. He was someone who cared about me as a person. I started telling him things I hadn't shared with anyone else. The pressure at home, the tension with my parents, how I didn't quite fit in at school. He listened without judgment. I had never felt this understood before. Mr. Matthews began to compliment me more, not just on my work, but on how I carried myself, how I handled difficult situations. He made me feel special, like I was different from the other students. The compliments, the attention, it started to feel like more than what a teacher would typically give. At first, I wasn't sure how to process it. I had always been shy and reserved, so the idea of someone paying this much attention to me felt both flattering and confusing. But soon, it became clear to me that he was seeing me in a way no one else did. It wasn't just the compliments. It was the way he looked at me sometimes, the way his gaze lingered a little longer than necessary. He'd smile when I walked into the classroom, as if seeing me brought him some kind of joy. I didn't know how to react, so I brushed it off. Teachers were supposed to make students feel good about themselves, right? But there was something about the way he spoke to me, the way his words seemed to carry an unspoken weight, that made me wonder if he felt something beyond the normal teacher-student dynamic. The boundaries between us began to blur. I found myself staying after class more often just to talk. The excuses were always small, asking about an assignment, discussing a grade, but the real reason was that I didn't want those moments to end. I didn't want to leave his presence. The longer we talked, the more I realized that I was relying on him more than I should. He had become my emotional anchor. I didn't have anyone else to turn to, and he made me feel like I wasn't alone. It was comforting, but I began to realize that I was getting too close to crossing a line I didn't fully understand. One afternoon, after class, I stayed behind as usual, hoping for one of those moments when he would just listen. That day, I shared with him a particularly difficult situation I was dealing with at home. I remember feeling vulnerable, but there was a strange sense of relief in telling him. He looked at me with such sympathy, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a student to him. He told me that I was strong, that I was handling things better than most people could. His words made me feel valued, important. I clung to them like a lifeline. It was in these moments that I started to notice the subtle changes in how he treated me. He would occasionally touch my arm when he spoke, just a brief, casual gesture, but each time it sent a strange shiver through me. I couldn't tell if it was just his way of showing sympathy or something anymore. The consequences of what had been brewing between Mr. Matthews and me began to hit me all at once. I had convinced myself that everything was fine, that we shared a special bond that no one else could understand. But as our relationship continued to evolve, I found myself standing at a crossroads, unable to ignore the gravity of what had been happening. I was no longer just a student in his class. I was someone who had become emotionally entangled, and it was beginning to show. At first, I didn't recognize how much this connection was affecting my daily life. I was so caught up in the rush of validation and attention that I failed to see how it was slowly taking over my thoughts. Every moment I spent with Mr. Matthews became an obsession. I couldn't focus on anything else: schoolwork, friends, family. My relationships with everyone outside of him began to deteriorate. My parents noticed the change in me, but I didn't tell them what was going on. How could I explain it? I didn't even know how to articulate the confusion I was feeling, or how to make sense of the strange, mixed emotions that had taken root. But the deeper we went into this emotional affair, the harder it became to keep it hidden. I started to make excuses for why I was staying late at school, why I wasn't hanging out with friends as much. I wasn't just seeking his attention anymore. I was depending on it. The moments we spent together weren't enough. I wanted more. And yet, the deeper I went, the more I began to question if this was really what I wanted, or if it was something I had gotten too far into to back out of. One day, after a particularly intimate conversation where Mr. Matthews comforted me through a family issue, I found myself wishing for more than just a hug or a kind word. His touch, though fleeting, made me crave something I had no business craving. I was terrified of the emotions swirling inside me, but I couldn't deny that they were there. I told myself that it was just me being dramatic, that everything was fine, but deep down, I knew that I was crossing a line. And so was he. The situation came to a head one afternoon when, after a long conversation about my future, Mr. Matthews suddenly leaned in closer than usual. I felt the tension in the air, the brief pause before he whispered words I couldn't quite comprehend in that moment. It wasn't just a teacher comforting a student anymore. It was something more, something dangerous. I pulled back, my heart racing, realizing too late that I had allowed this to go too far. The guilt washed over me instantly. I had been so wrapped up in the attention and the emotional connection that I had allowed myself to believe it was harmless. But now, everything felt different. The intimacy we had shared, the blurred lines between what was appropriate and what was not, hung in the air between us. I couldn't deny it anymore. What we had was not healthy. It was manipulation, plain and simple. He had taken advantage of my vulnerability, and I had allowed it to happen because I was too emotionally invested to see the truth. The aftermath of that moment was immediate. The quiet tension between us grew unbearable. I started to withdraw, avoiding his gaze, avoiding conversations that had once felt so natural. I knew I had to get out, to stop the cycle before it got worse. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. I couldn't undo what had happened, and I couldn't unfeel the emotions that had been stirred up within me. It was like a weight had settled in my chest, and no matter how hard I tried to move forward, it lingered. As if things couldn't get worse, the affair, which had been hidden behind closed doors, was about to be exposed. A fellow student, someone who had seen me leaving the classroom late one day, began to ask questions. At first, I thought nothing of it. But soon, whispers started circulating. I heard rumors in the hallways, felt the looks from other students, and suddenly, everything I had kept secret was on the verge of being revealed. The tension, the fear, and the shame began to consume me. I knew I couldn't keep it hidden forever. Soon my parents found out. They were devastated. The trust one had built with them for years crumbled in an instant. The idea that I had become involved in something so inappropriate, so damaging, was incomprehensible to them. Their disappointment was written all over their faces, and their questions were relentless. They couldn't understand why I hadn't come to them sooner, why I had let things go so far. But the truth was, I didn't know either. I had become so caught up in the attention, so desperate for approval, that I had lost sight of everything that mattered. As for Mr. Matthews, his fate was sealed. The school administration launched an investigation, and it didn't take long for the truth to come out. I felt a sense of betrayal, not just because of what had happened between us, but because I had trusted him. I had believed in the kindness and understanding he had shown me, only to realize that it was all part of his manipulation. He had abused his position, and I had been too blinded by my own emotional turmoil to see it. The consequences of our actions were far-reaching. Mr. Matthews lost his job, his career, and his reputation. But the damage didn't stop there. It had affected me in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. The emotional toll was immense. I felt ashamed, guilty, and broken. What had started as a simple connection, a teacher trying to help a struggling student, had spiraled into something I couldn't escape. The truth was, the affair didn't just ruin his life, it ruined mine, too. The aftermath of everything that had transpired left me in a state of utter chaos. My life, once simple and predictable, had become a series of shattered pieces that I couldn't put back together. The guilt and shame weighed heavily on me every day. I couldn't escape the constant barrage of thoughts, replaying the moments when I allowed myself to fall deeper into a situation that I knew, deep down, wasn't right. I couldn't undo the things I had done, the choices I had made. The weight of it all left me feeling isolated and confused, unsure of who I even was anymore. My parents, understandably, were devastated by what had happened. Their disappointment was suffocating, but I couldn't blame them. I had betrayed their trust, let them down in a way I never thought I could. I had never imagined my life would spiral into this kind of mess. They tried to reach out to help me process everything, but I couldn't find the words to explain what I had been through. How could I explain that I had been manipulated when I had willingly participated in the affair? How could I tell them that I had been so desperate for someone to care, someone to see me, that I ignored all the red flags? I went through phases of intense self-loathing. I hated myself for letting it go as far as it did. I hated myself for not recognizing the manipulation when it started. I had always prided myself on being strong, on making good choices, but here I was, broken and lost. The constant fear of what people might say, what others would think, haunted me. I knew the whispers would never stop. Everyone at school knew what had happened, and no matter how much I tried to distance myself from the past, it clung to me like a dark cloud. But as time went on, I